Yeah, they're coming on now. So they're about 3 or 4. So I'll get ready in just a few minutes. I'll start in 4 minutes. Hello everyone, welcome. Glad to have you here this evening. So good to have you all come. I hope you enjoyed last night. I have an update on a couple of items from last night. And at the end of the fireside reading, I have a wonderful surprise for all of you. It's an object that is poignant and historic and relates to where we are right now. So I decided this evening to dress for the occasion. It would be like an at-home in Victorian or Edwardian society. And I have a shawl to keep me warm. And I'm going to try this. I can't read the book with this because these aren't my prescription, but they're pretty good. Every gentleman, Edwardian gentleman or Victorian gentleman would have these. These are reading glasses. And I can actually, they're pretty good. I can read a little bit. The problem is I can't hold the book and read at the same time for you all and have my face looking at you. So we will move on and I will put my glasses back on. And I hope you enjoyed last night. It's posted on both YouTube and Facebook Live. Tonight, firstly, I'm going to give you an update and thank people who are here with me. If you hold on 1 second, I need to get my pipe and relight it. I'm back. I hope you're still there. I can't find my good lighter and I can't find my camper. This is what happens to you when you're cooped up in the house. I want to thank Ben Kistner for my pipe. It was a birthday present a couple years ago. And he and his kids are going to watch. They live in Denver now. And we met at Church of the Resurrection. And we've been friends ever since. Not to plug them, but they have a wonderful travel bag company called Logan and Leonora. You should check it out. Tonight we'll be reading from The Lion, Witch, and the Wardrobe. Sorry about that. And this copy is thanks to my neighbor, Margaret and Ed Moore. They were very kind. It's actually their son's Charles, but he's not around, so I got to borrow. Anyway, we will start with chapter 1. But before I do that, I want to show you a couple of things. I have a good friend who knows everything about Victorian everything. And we spent some time today looking at objects, especially this one. The one with the, I was showing it last night, the one with the trident, the Neptune's trident. And I found out what it is. We started with, is it an oyster fork? Could it be a toaster to put to toast crumpets in the wood stove or the fireplace? We decided not, and thanks to Betty Elliott, my authority on anything Victorian, found out that she actually found a picture of it, and it's actually a lettuce fork. So every Victorian would survive coronavirus very easily because they could use this fork, and it's not exactly 6 feet away, but it's far enough away that they wouldn't contaminate the lettuce. And I don't have the exact quote, but Betty quoted her grandmother from New York, and in fact, maybe I can get it. I will get it because it's really fun, and then I'll start reading. So you thought that the Victorians were stuffy. Well, they are. And corsets do hold in certain things. But Betty informed me that her grandmother always said, I think sometimes they just served lettuce. Remember my grandmother's rule. This is for all of you out there. Like cultured people of New York, you cut your lettuce with a fork. This is a lettuce server, for sure, of course. I don't have the knife. Also tonight, I'm wearing, I discovered, I'm wearing what a gentleman would wear for an at-home where you would invite people over. And I have a black watch plaid tuxedo, or a dressing gown actually. And the glasses, the tortoiseshell glasses, were a gift from a really good friend of mine, an optometrist. And it was his grandmother's, and it's from Holland, from around the turn of the century. And I decided to wear a velvet vest, and the reason I'm doing this is to show you, last night we talked about this collar button container. Well, I found this shirt. It's never been worn. It's a Manhattan shirt from the 40s. And I had it, I just never wore it. And it is, that's for the buttons. There's a button here, and then there's buttons around the back. It's a collarless shirt, and this would be where you'd have celluloid collars. So now we'll get started. This is C.S. Lewis, The Lion, the Witch, and the Wardrobe. And this is the first installment. I'm going to read the dedication because it's really wonderful. Dear Lucy, my dear Lucy, I wrote this story for you, but when I began it, I had not realized that girls grow quicker than books. As a result, you are already too old for fairy tales, and by the time it's printed and bound, you will be older still. But someday you will be old enough to start reading fairy tales again. You can take it down from some upper shelf, dust it, and tell me what you think of it. I shall probably be too deaf to hear and too old to understand a word you say, but I shall be your affectionate godfather, C.S. Lewis. I want you to know that Punky, I can't picture her, but Punky the cat is here watching the fire and listening to the story. Chapter 1, Lucy looks into a wardrobe. Once there were 4 children whose names were Peter, Susan, Edmund, and Lucy. This story is about something that happened to them when they were sent away from London during the war because of the air raids. They were sent to the house of an old professor who lived in the heart of the country. It was 10 miles from the nearest railway station and 2 miles from the nearest post office. Well, where I live here, it's very much like that. We do have a post office, but there's no ATM except about 10 miles away. He had no wife. He lived in a very large house with a housekeeper called Mrs. Macready and 3 servants. Their names were Ivy, Margaret, and Betty, but they do not come into the story very much. He himself was a very old man with shaggy white hair which grew over most of his face as well as on his head. And they liked him almost at once. But on the first evening he came out to meet them at the front door, he was so odd-looking that Lucy, who was the youngest, was a little afraid of him. And Edmund, who was the next youngest, wanted to laugh and had to keep on pretending he was blowing his nose to hide that he was laughing. As soon as they said good night to the professor and gone upstairs on the first night, the boys came into the girls' room and they all talked it over. Do you guys talk with your brothers and sisters at night when you're supposed to be going to sleep? I'm sure you do. Anyway, that's what they did. Peter starts out and says, "We've fallen on our feet, and no mistake. This is going to be perfectly splendid." That old chap will let us do anything we like. Susan replies, I think he's an old dear. I think he's wonderful. Oh, come off it, said Edmund, who was tired and pretending not to be tired, which always made him very bad-tempered. Don't go on talking like that. Like what? Said Susan. And anyway, it's time you were in bed. Trying to talk like mother, said Edmund. And who are you to say I'm going to bed? Go to bed yourself. Hadn't we all better go to bed, said Lucy. There's sure to be a row if we're heard talking up here. No, there won't, said Peter. I tell you, this is the sort of house where no one's going to mind what we do. Anyway, they won't hear us. It's about 10 minutes walk from here down to that dining room, and any amount of stairs and passages in between. What's that noise? Said Lucy suddenly. It was a far larger house than she had ever been in before, and the thought of all those long passages and rows of doors leading into empty rooms was beginning to make her feel a little creepy. I once lived in a house like that in Washington, D.C. It's a whole row of rooms. It was up on the servants' quarters. It's called Fellowship House, and it was very creepy. I used to, when I was young, I'd have nightmares about there's a big bear in one of the rooms down the hall. It's only a bird, silly, said Edmund. It's an owl, said Peter. This is going to be a wonderful place for birds. I shall go to bed now. I say, let's go and explore tomorrow. You might find anything in a place like this. Did you see the mountains as we came along? And the woods? There might be eagles. There might be stags. There'll be hawks. Badgers, said Lucy. Foxes, said Edmund. Rabbits, said Susan. But when the next morning came, there was a steady rain falling, so thick that when you looked out of the window, you could see neither the mountains, nor the woods, nor even the stream in the garden. Of course it would be raining, said Edmund. They had just finished their breakfast with the professor and were upstairs in the room he had set apart for them. It was a long, low room with 2 windows looking out in one direction and 2 in another. Do stop grumbling, Ed, said Susan. 10 to 1, it'll clear up in an hour or so. And in the meantime, we're pretty well off. There's a wireless and lots of books. Do you children know what a wireless is? It's an early form of radio, so they could listen to the radio. Not for me, said Peter. I'm going to explore in the house. Everyone eventually agreed to this, and that was how the adventures began. It was the sort of house that you never seemed to come to the end of, and it was full of unexpected places. The first few doors they tried led only into spare bedrooms, as everyone had expected that they would. But soon they came to a very long room full of pictures, and they found a suit of armor. And after that was a room all hung with green, with a harp in one corner. And then came 3 steps down and 5 steps up, and then a kind of little upstairs hall and a door that led out onto a balcony. And then a whole series of rooms that led into each other and were lined with books. Most of them very old books, some bigger than a Bible in a church. And shortly after, they looked into a room that was quite empty, except for one big wardrobe, the sort that had a looking glass in the door. You know, I have a wardrobe in my room with a looking glass, and one of these nights I will show it to you. Remember, that isn't what I'm going to show you tonight, but I do have a small surprise at the end. There was nothing else in the room at all except a dead blue bottle on the windowsill. Nothing there, said Peter, and they all trooped out again, all except Lucy. She stayed behind because she thought it would be worthwhile trying the door of the wardrobe, even though she felt almost sure that it would be locked. To her surprise, it opened quite easily, and 2 mothballs dropped out. Do you know what mothballs smell like? I think some of us still have them. I had an uncle one time who smoked lots of cigars, and his name was Uncle Emil, and he would always say, oh, I smoke the cigars because it kills the moths, keeps the moths out of the closets. I don't think they'd hurt. Looking into the inside, we're back in the wardrobe now. Looking into the inside, she saw several coats hanging up, mostly long fur coats. There was nothing Lucy liked so much as the smell and feel of fur. Now, none of us kind of know that much anymore, except for grannies that have old furs, because we no longer kill animals to wear furs. But they do smell wonderful and they feel wonderful, and they're very comforting. My aunt had some, and they always smelled like cedar because she stored them in a cedar chest. She immediately stepped into the wardrobe and got in among the coats and rubbed her face against them, leaving the door open, of course. Of course she'd leave the door open because she knew it's very foolish to shut oneself into any wardrobe. The lock might stick and you can't get out. So she went further in and found out that there was a second row of coats hanging up behind the first one. This is quite a strange wardrobe, isn't it? It was almost quite dark in there, and she kept her arms stretched out in front of her so as not to bump her face into the back of the wardrobe. You'd think she'd finally get there. Well, you have to read on. She took a step further in, and then 2 or 3 steps, 3 steps more, always expecting to feel woodwork against the tips of her fingers. But she could not feel it. Sorry. This must be a simply enormous wardrobe, thought Lucy, going still further in and pushing the soft folds of the coats aside to make room for her. Then she noticed that there was something crunching under her feet. I wonder what that could be. Let's keep reading. She said, I wonder if it's just more mothballs, she thought, stooping down to feel it with her hand. But instead of feeling the hard, smooth wood of the floor of the wardrobe, she felt something soft and powdery and extremely cold. This is very queer, she said, and went on a step or 2 further. The next moment, she found what was rubbing against her face and hands. She found that what was rubbing against her face and hands was no longer soft fur, but something hard and rough and even prickly. Why, it's just like branches of trees, exclaimed Lucy. And then she saw that there was a light ahead of her. Then she saw there was a light ahead of her, not a few inches away, where the back of the wardrobe ought to have been. So there must not have been a back of the wardrobe. Let's keep reading. But a long way off, wherever that was. Something cold and soft was falling on her. A moment later, she found that she was standing in the middle of a wood at nighttime, with snow under her feet and snowflakes falling through the air. Lucy felt a little frightened, but she felt very inquisitive and excited as well. Do you, when you get frightened, get also excited? I do. I don't love to be frightened, but sometimes when I am frightened, I get excited also. She looked back over the shoulder, and there, between the dark tree trunks, she could still see the open door of the wardrobe, and even catch a glimpse of the empty room from which she had set out. She had, of course, left the door open, for she knew that it was a very silly thing to shut oneself into a wardrobe. It seemed to be still daylight there. She said to herself, I can always get back if anything goes wrong, thought Lucy. She began to walk forward, crunch, crunch over the snow. Crunch, crunch over the snow and through the wood toward the other light. In about 10 minutes, she reached it and found it was a lamppost. As she stood looking at it, wondering why there was a lamppost in the middle of the wood. Why would the lamppost be in the middle of the wood? That's kind of an odd thing, isn't it? She will read on, and wondering what to do next, she heard a pitter-patter of feet coming toward her. Oh my, I wonder what it is, an animal or what? And soon after, a very strange person stepped out from among the trees into the light of the lamppost. He was only a little taller than Lucy herself, and he carried over his head an umbrella, which was white with snow. From the waist upward, he was like a man, but his legs were shaped like a goat. The hair on them was glossy black, but instead of feet, he had goat's hoofs. He also had a tail. But Lucy did not notice this at first, because the tail was neatly caught up over his arm and over the arm that held the umbrella, so as to keep it from trailing in the snow. What a strange sight this person, this animal, this creature is. Reading on, he had on a red woolen muffler around his neck, and his skin was rather reddish too. Do you like to wear mufflers, especially in the winter? They're really nice and cozy and warm. He had a strange but pleasant little face with a short, pointed beard and curly hair. And out of the hair there stuck 2 horns, one on each side of his forehead. How strange. One of his hands, as I have said, held the umbrella. The other arm he carried several brown paper parcels. How strange to come upon a creature like this with parcels. Is he a postman? What with the parcels and the snow, it looked just as if he had been doing his Christmas shopping. Well, of course, that's what you would do in those days. He was a fawn, and when he saw Lucy, he gave such a start of surprise that he dropped all his parcels. "Goodness gracious me," exclaimed the fawn. That's the end of chapter 1. We'll come back and read chapter 2 next time. I'm with you. Before I leave, I told you there's a surprise I have. It's an object. It's a wonderful object. And I have to get it here. Just pardon me for a second. Oh yeah, I put it over here because it's very fragile. Put it over on the piano away from the fireplace because of the heat. When Abigail and Nathan and I and their friends were in from Italy, were in France last year. We were in Strasbourg for the Christmas market, and the last day we were there, we were walking late in the streets till about 8 o'clock at night, and I came on an antique store with a nativity scene in the window. That store had been there since 1837, and I wanted to bring this and show this to you. This is a beautiful small processional crucifix, and it dates. It's very poignant for our time right now. It dates from the flu epidemic in 1918, and it dates from World War I. And it was these were given, very fragile. They'll melt if I got them near the fire. They were given to people who completed their pilgrimage from France on the Compostela to Spain. And on that travel each day, they would walk to a chapel. The chapels were about 20 miles apart. And it was said that the early pilgrims, when they went into the chapel, they acknowledged and prayed and thanked God for the sacred space they had walked in all day. The church was there to acknowledge it. And this was given as a honor for them completing the pilgrimage. I just think it's very poignant for our times. And you kids, love your family and your parents and your brothers and sisters, because life is very fragile, as we know too well today. So thank you for coming. Thank you for being here. I look forward to seeing you next time. God bless. Love you all very much. I have another surprise just before I get off. Some of you know, well, Gotta find it. Ah, here it is. It's also away from the fire. Some of you remember my beautiful, wonderful, loving wife, Twyla, who played the piano exquisitely. I was trying to find something for you children an object that you children could see that was something that was used way before computer screens or cell phones or anything else, almost before pencils and paper. This is a slate school book that you would take to school, and you would write notes and take notes on the lectures, and you would practice rhymes and practice spelling and alphabet. And this is quite old. This was about the time that my grandfather went to school, which would have been in the late 1800s. And I found this today, and on the back, I don't think you can see it, but there's some of the things they used were a little bit sharp, and there are all kinds of figures and numbers on it. It's really quite cool. It's been used for years and years and years. I opened it, and I'd forgotten, but for one Christmas, we used to have this in our breakfast room where we'd have breakfast every day. And every once in a while, my wife would write something on it, and this was for Christmas, and for Advent. It's O Come, Emmanuel, with a note and a treble clef. And the other side, it's Advent. I can't read it, it's been illegible, but it was such a nice surprise to have a little message from her today, even though she's been away for 4 years. So I thank God that He's blessed her with relief and is in heaven. And I hope that you all pray with your folks tonight before you go to bed. Thanks for letting me share. Talk to you soon.